Hi everyone, Martin Bamford here. Earlier today, I caught up with Kevin Pratt, personal finance journalist and editor of Forbes Advisor UK. With soaring wholesale energy prices squeezing household budgets and families facing an energy price crisis this winter, I wanted to delve into some of the issues at play here. This was a conversation we recorded for the Informed Choice Radio podcast. That's out later this week, but I wanted to share the key parts of it here with you right now. We chat about the drivers of these rising prices, what steps we can take to keep our bills manageable, and whether now is the right time to invest in renewable energy production at home. Should you go and stick a solar panel on your roof or get a ground source heat pump? Kevin's been writing about all of the aspects of household finance for over 30 years, aiming to provide information that will help readers make good choices with their money. He is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to the energy market, absolutely the right person to chat to about these issues. So here's our conversation. When we think of price comparison websites, one of the things we go onto them for is to get better deals for our gas and electricity bills. Now, home domestic energy is clearly in the press at the moment. Why is it generating so much attention, so many headlines?
Because prices on the wholesale market, so when the people who supply our homes with gas and electricity have to buy that somewhere, and the prices they're paying for it have just gone through the roof, especially for gas, something like 300% this year. And I heard this morning they went up by another 15% just yesterday. So those prices have gone up, but because of something called the energy price cap, they can't pass on all those increased costs to their customers, that's you and me. And that means a lot of them, around 24 this year, have gone out of business. 2 went out of business yesterday. So a lot of customers are finding themselves with a company that's gone bust. They're relying on the regulator, an outfit called Ofgem, to move them from their old company to a new one. So there's a great sense of upheaval and concern because people are seeing prices going up. They're seeing these stories in the press, and they're wondering what's going to happen to their bills. So understandably, because bills are such a big part of household expenditure, energy bills, something like, 5 or 10% for many households and more for some, that's going to have a big impact on their available money to spend on other things. So it's going to put a big squeeze on household finances in the coming weeks and months. But what's fascinating, you mentioned price comparison sites in the energy market. Previously, up until about 4 or 5 months ago, people such as myself were saying what you need to do if you're on a what's called a standard variable rate tariff, you need to move away from that. You need to switch to a fixed rate tariff, which will be probably a couple of £100 cheaper. You'll save money year on year. You know, when you come to the end of the fixed term, which will probably be 12 months, switch again, you find another good deal. As long as you're not on a standard variable rate tariff, things will be fine. Now, that's changed completely. You come to our site, you come to other sites, your money supermarkets, and you compare the markets. We're not offering a switching service because there's nothing that you can switch to that is cheaper than the standard variable rates tariffs that I mentioned a minute ago. And that's because the energy suppliers cannot buy energy on the wholesale markets at such a price that they can undercut those standard variable rate tariffs.
Right.
And the standard variable rate tariff is at a certain price. I mentioned Ofgem a minute ago. Ofgem has a price cap that says you can't charge more than a certain amount for a standard variable rate tariff. So that means many companies are actually operating at a loss. They can't pass on the cost.
Right.
They're operating at a loss. And that's why we're seeing on a weekly basis at the moment, we're seeing companies go bust.
And I guess those companies are also a bit scared to offer an attractive fixed rate deal in case wholesale prices go up another 100%, 300%, whatever it moves, because then they'll be committed to delivering to the households at that fixed term, fixed price.
That's the nail on the head, Martin. You're absolutely right. And that's what's happened. Companies were offering fixed rates, thinking that they could continue to buy wholesale energy at a certain price. The market's gone against them. Some companies used a process called hedging, which meant they bought a year's supply in advance. But in order to do that, you've got to have a stack of capital behind you. You've got to be really well-resourced business. And some of the smaller firms There used to be 50 odd energy suppliers. That's whittling down now. It's probably below 40. Some of the smaller suppliers just didn't have the capital resource to buy a year's supply in advance. So they were hand to mouth buying and selling at the same time. And as the prices went up, they couldn't charge. They were committed to a fixed rate price for their customers, couldn't increase that. There was only one outcome.
And you mentioned the size of these energy providers. My perception from seeing the headlines is that the ones who have failed to date have been smaller firms, but still looking after an awful lot of customers.
Yeah, I think the current figure for firms that have gone out of business since the summer, say, it's affected around 2 million customers, so a substantial number of people. And I think the largest firm had 400,000, maybe 500,000 customers. So they're not insignificant. I mean, there are some that only have a few thousand, but most of them have a decent number of customers. But the thing to remember is, even if they've only got one customer and that one customer is me, I'm going to think, hang on, I didn't sign up for this. What's going on? You know what? Things will probably get worse. No one likes to be a merchant of doom. But the price cap that I mentioned is set twice a year.
Yeah.
And it went up in October by 12% and now stands at £1,277 for someone with typical consumption. A chunky amount of money out of anybody's household budget. It goes up again in April. It goes up twice a year, 1st of October, 1st of April. So April 2022 is going to go up again. And the expectation amongst many people is that it will rise substantially to take account of those wholesale price increases I alluded to earlier. And I've seen figures quoted by people who I respect and that can trust their judgment. People like Martin Lewis and others have said prices might go up by much as £200, £300, £400. So that 1277 figure I mentioned could be north of £1,600, £1,700, and most people will be paying that if they use a typical amount of energy, they will be paying that. So that's like a 30% increase.
Yeah.
To look forward to in the new year. That's
significant, isn't it? And will that raise, if that materialises, will that increase in the energy cap be sufficient for some more energy providers to keep going, particularly if we do see wholesale prices rise even more?
I think there'll be more corporate casualties because you're right, the economics just don't add up for some businesses. And Ofgem, the regulator, has actually announced that it's in addition to its normal review process for the cap, which takes place between sort of now and February, with the increase taking effect in April. In addition to that, they're going to do like a root and branch review of the cap, the mechanisms that apply, the factors they have to take into account when calculating how much it should either go up or come down by. It's only going in one direction at the moment. And I think they're treading a tightrope because on the one hand, the market's got to be viable for a certain number of companies so that it's competitive. But on the other hand, if they increase the cap to allow these companies to operate profitably, it's going to hammer consumers. How do you square that circle? I'm not sure. Ofgem's come in for a bit of flack recently because people are saying it's not regulated as effectively as it should have done, and if it had done, we wouldn't have these corporate failures. That's not for me to comment on, but there will be a lot of people looking very closely at how Ofgem balances the competing demands it has facing it at the moment.
And what about if you're a customer then of one of these failed energy providers, accepting that 20 plus have already gone since the summer and we may see more failures? What do you do? Do you need to do anything, or is it all taken care of for you?
Well, if your company goes out of business, Ofgem, the regulator, will step in and it will guarantee your supply. So the first thing that concerns people, quite understandably, is my company's gone bust. Does that mean I'm going to flip the switch and the light's not going to come on? That's not the case. Ofgem will guarantee supply of your gas and your electricity. It will also appoint a new supplier to take over your business. So all the companies with failed company A will go to company B. That's called a supplier of last resort. So you will then shift this new company. The new company will get in touch with you and they'll tell you the tariff that you will be moved to. If you're not happy with it, you're then free to switch.
Right.
But going back to what I said earlier, there's nothing really to switch to that would be more competitive than the tariff you end up on with the new company. Because Ofgem tells the new company, great, you can have these customers, but you can't charge them more than our cap. So you have that little bit of security that you're not going to be put on something that's relatively expensive. You're going to be put on something at the level of the cap. And then you can sit tight. And at some point, if the market returns to normality, which it should do in due course, you can then think about switching to a cheaper, probably fixed rate tariff somewhere down the line. But certainly in the short term, don't be worried about your supply. That's guaranteed. If you've got a credit balance with your old company that you've built up through your own contributions, that will be protected as well with the new company.
Right.
And you'll be switched to the new company in a kind of seamless behind the scenes operation. The only thing you have to do is take a meter reading. And if you can do it on a phone, fine, because then whichever way you do it, as long as you can communicate the meter reading on the day you found out that your old company gone bust.
Yeah.
And that will just smooth the admin process of moving from the old one to the new one.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to ask about credit balances, but you've answered my question already, because I've had a personal experience. We left an office at the end of last year, and my energy supplier took until a week ago. So what's that? Nearly 10 months, 11 months to send the check for the credit balance, and just the administration side. But I can imagine if the company's failed, it's probably better that they just transfer the credit balance to the new energy provider rather than try and actually pay us out, because this wouldn't be there.
Yeah, but anecdotally, Martin, you do hear stories about people who have problems contacting their failed supplier, because unfortunately when a company goes bust, they normally close the doors on the day, and their staff are told, the bad news, they're not needed anymore, and they let them go. So there's nobody there to answer the phones. So people normally the reflex might be to go to the company's website, where they usually encounter a message that says, we're really sorry, but we've ceased trading. If you've got any questions, Ofgem will help. But people are worried. They're thinking, well, I've got a £400 balance. Well, what's happening to that? And they don't necessarily hear someone like me banging on about it, or read Martin Lewis or Paul Lewis on the BBC telling them these things, because in the course of normal life, you don't always encounter that sort of messaging. So, and your reflex is to go to the prime source. So if you can't get a satisfactory answer there, that increases your uncertainty and your anxiety.
So assuming that we have to, like it and lump it and accept we're in a period now of high gas and electricity prices, I guess the only real response we can take as consumers is to try and use less energy in our homes. Or any advice, any tips for how we can reduce our bills that way?
Yes, but I always approach this with I think whether a pinch of salt is the right way to describe it, I don't know. But if you say to somebody, look, you can save 8 pence a week by turning off your appliances on standby, and there's probably another couple of quid a year to be saved by only boiling the amount of water in the kettle that you need to make the drinks that you're serving up. It feels like cheese pairing, if you know what I mean. A few pence here, a couple of quid there, but it's better than nothing. And cumulatively, you can knock a decent amount off. So you're looking at things like making sure that if you've got a room in the house that isn't often used, spare bedroom, whatever it might be, don't have the radiator on in there. Turn your thermostat down by a degree and see if you don't notice the difference in temperature. Because if you can survive at 1 degree lower and you're comfortable, then you're probably going to be saving 60, 70 quid a year just by turning it down. And look at the timings on your thermostat. Is it coming on early in the morning when nobody's up? Is it on during the day when people are out of the house? Things like that. So you need to maybe go around your house and do a bit of an audit. Is there a draft coming in? Because I always think cold air coming in means warm air going out. So little things like your letterbox and your keyholes and things like that, you can just put your hand against them. Is there a draft? have I got a sofa in front of my radiator? So
Yes.
I've got to love the back of my sofa is lovely and warm, and where I'm sitting, it's 10 degrees cooler. And that, that might make a difference to the ambient temperature in the room, and you can adjust your thermostat accordingly. Yeah. So it's for everybody. It's a case of going round, seeing where there's little red lights on the TV and nobody's watching it. What does that mean? I've got a TV box, and you think, well, that's not doing any harm. It's only a little red light. But if you get up close to it, you can hear all this background buzzing. You think, oh, something's powering that, and I'm paying for it. So maybe I just flick that off.
Yeah, and of course, using a smart meter helps us to understand how much energy we consume in electricity we're consuming on a basis, and you can go around and you can experiment. You can switch the oven on and see what impact that has on the hourly cost and things.
Absolutely, and there's various bits of tech that you can get, apps mainly, that allow you to control your heating, say, remotely. So if you're out of the house, I left the heating on. You can use your app to turn it off, or if you're coming home earlier than you expected, you can turn it on so the house is welcoming when you get back. So it's worth exploring those sorts of things. Quick Google of smart home management devices will put an array of those things in front of you, and there will be initial outlay, perhaps if you need to fit something that will allow you to control your thermostat remotely using your phone. Then you might be spending a bit, but you can make that back over time through saves, and you've got the added convenience of what the app offers in the first place. So it's worth thinking about.
And of course, the less energy we use in our homes, the better it is for the planet, the less of a carbon footprint we have. So you also mentioned the sort of cost of things like the tech paying back over time. What about the more extreme things we can do, like getting solar panels fitted or ground source heat pumps and things that are good for the planet and probably also good for our wallets over the long term?
This is possibly a difficult one, because with things like solar power and heat pumps, you're probably into £5,000-10,000 to get you. Certainly with a heat pump, you'd probably be spending £6,000-7,000 for a basic model. An array of solar panels would cost more, but obviously the number you fit, the size of your property would affect that. So you'd need to be, I think, very wealthy, or very committed to the environmental benefits, preferably both, in order to make those work in the short term. That said, the government has its clear targets for reducing carbon emissions. If it's going to make those realistic, it has to get the public on board. And personally, I don't think it will succeed unless it is willing to help finance that sort of infrastructure change.
Right.
At a domestic level. So 2 months ago, the government announced grants of £5,000 to help people install heat pumps, ground heat pumps. But there's a limited number available. And I think it's something like 90,000 of those £5,000 grants. That's obviously that's a tiny, tiny fraction of 30 million homes in the UK. And then you're thinking, okay, in order to have a ground heat pump, you either need a big garden or you need a garden that you can drill very deep, because the way these things work, they absorb heat from the ground and then get it into your house, like a refrigerator in reverse, basically. But you need the sort of property that would be able to accommodate one of those. Now, if you live in a block of flats, or if you live in a terraced house that's been converted into flats, ground floor and first floor, there are those sort of logistical problems in making it work. So I think the government will need to take a long-term view about how it's going to bring about that sort of change on a national scale. That's the only way that they would get to the net zero by 2050.
Yeah. So possibly wait and see to see if more incentives come along. Because I remember years back there were sort of feed-in tariffs that made it very, very attractive to have solar panels, because the energy you generated that you didn't use in your home, you could send back to the national grid and get paid a small fortune for per kilowatt hour. So it would be lovely to see those come back at some point at that level.
I think you're right. I mean, they're not those sorts of mechanisms aren't available or aren't as generous as they once were. But you're right. You're going to persuade people via their pockets, I think. It's to get the kind of momentum that's required. It's the same with the private car fleet. I mean, there's something like 32 million cars on the road in the UK. I don't know the exact figure, but I would think probably not more than 2 million of those are electric vehicles or hybrids. The vast majority is still petrol or diesel. That's changing, but it's changing at a rate I don't think is sufficient to get the fleet over to electric vehicles purely or hydrogen or whatever technology we use. And the ambitions are to have that happening in 2030, 2035.
Yeah.
That's coming down the track at a very fast rate. When you think about how often people change their cars, how much it costs to buy an electric vehicle, how do you power an electric vehicle? All those kinds of infrastructure issues will need to be addressed before we can say, okay, we've done away with petrol, we've done away with diesel.
Yeah.
And again, just to go in a kind of a circle almost, if we have 30 million vehicles dependent on electricity, that's an awful lot of demand on the national grid. And if the cost of producing electricity on that scale is going through the roof, that's another set of issues to deal with.
Yeah, there's some significant challenges ahead, I think, and it's a difficult time clearly at the moment for households who are experiencing these rising bills, not just for their domestic energy, but all over the place. And we saw the latest inflation figures this morning coming in at 4.2% for CPI inflation, which is significant. But your tips and your advice, your wisdom today, Kevin, most appreciated. So thank you very much for joining us and sharing that.